the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Alt. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from The Magic Monastery by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Sting. A cat had cornered a scorpion, who decided to plead for his life. "Spare me, spare me! You can catch plenty of other things with more reward than a mouthful of gristle. If you let me go, I'll tell you my secret." Curious like all cats, the cat leant forward and the scorpion whispered into his ear. The scorpion was allowed to go, and the cat went back to his master. As soon as the man picked him up, the cat, with his newfound skill, buried his claw with a backwards movement in his master's arm. No scorpion could have done better. And the man put the cat in a bag and dropped the bag into a river. Contradictions. An interchange between a Sufi and an inquirer. Which statement should one choose if two Sufi sayings contradict each other? They only contradict one another if viewed separately. If you clap your hands and observe only the movement of the hands, they appear to oppose one another. You have not seen what is happening. The purpose of the opposition of the palms was, of course, to produce the hand clap. The fruit. There were once 3 men, all of whom wanted fruit, though none of them had ever seen any, since it was rare in their country. It so happened that they all travelled in search of this almost unknown thing called fruit. And it also happened that, at about the same time, each one found his way to a fruit tree. The first man was a heedless man. He got to the tree, but had spent so much time thinking about the directions that he failed to recognize the fruit. His journey was wasted. The second man was a fool, who took things very literally. When he saw that all the fruit on the tree was past its best, he said, "Well, I've seen fruit, and I don't like rotten things, so that is the end of fruit as far as I'm concerned." He went on his way, and his journey was wasted. The third man was wise. He picked up some of the fruit and examined it. After some thought, and racking his brains to remember all the possibilities about this uneatable delicacy, he found that inside each fruit there was a stone. Once he knew that this stone was a seed, all he had to do was to plant and tend the growth and wait for fruit. The Slave Sufi. It is related that one of the Sufi great ones was a slave, Ayaz, who became the trusted companion of Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna. A courtier, so runs the tale, said to him, "You were a dervish and then carried into captivity. Then you served Mahmud for years, and you still do so. Such is your sanctity, however, that the Sultan would immediately give you your freedom if you asked for it. Why do you remain in this strange position?" Ayaz heaved a deep sigh and said, "If I cease to be a slave, where on earth is the man whom people will be able to point out as a slave who is a teacher? And if I leave the king, who will be left to bring admonitions to courtiers? They will listen to me because I have the ear of Mahmud. It is you, dear friend, who made this little world like this for yourselves. And yet it is you who ask me why I am like this within this cage of men." Unlikely legend. "Cosmetic surgery," said an eagle, "is not only useful, it is practically a necessity with the present development of the social environment." when he had his talons trimmed and his beak shortened, everyone liked the effect so much that they had it done too. Almost all of them, that is. The ones who did not trouble themselves about improving their appearance were the crows. They grew their claws and waited for a day when the other predators should have practiced chiropody and developed civilization for so long that they wouldn't know what to do with claws, even if their social taboos, under pressure, allowed them to grow them again. Surroundings. A certain Sufi called another man, who greatly respected him, to come and live in his house. But within 4 days the Sufi left on a long journey, and was away for 3 years. The guest felt extremely uncomfortable. Deprived of his master's presence, he was confused, and he even found himself looking after the affairs of the house. Many years later, someone to whom he had confided his agitation returned to find that he had succeeded the Sufi, and his feelings were quite different now. He said, "What had seemed clear to me when I first arrived at my master's house was, I now see, really obscure. If he had stayed, I would not have been able to endure the intensity of his presence. As it was, what I wanted was to be with him. What I really needed was to breathe the air of his surroundings." The outline. There was once a house beside which a climbing plant rooted itself in the ground. As the years passed, the creeper covered the walls, leaving only a blurred outline to indicate that there was anything behind the greenery. It became more and more difficult to get into and out of the house through the ever-thickening greenery. The house ceased to be used at all. When parts of it crumbled, even the outline changed. When the house collapsed completely, it became a pleasing creeper-covered mound, about whose origin people only occasionally and idly wondered. The creeper was the most concerned. It said, "What an ungrateful edifice! I held it up for many years, but it threw itself on the ground just the same." So it spread itself all over the surrounding countryside. The difference. After giving a lecture, Sufi Putsir asked whether there was anyone present who wanted to ask a question. A visitor said, "I have heard a great deal about the wonderful qualities of the Master Inabi of Balkh, but when I visited him, I found him attended by only a handful of people, and what is more, he did not speak to any of them, sometimes for months on end. There were people there who told me that he had never addressed a single word to them. I come here and find you so much more lucid and so numerously attended that I am forced to conclude that it is you whom I should respect." Someone objected that this was not a question but a statement. The master said, "This is in fact a question, though it is not specifically put as one. But it is more clearly a question than the majority of questions, which are generally challenges or statements. So let us treat it as a question." Master Inabi has few people around him because he has been famous for 40 years. During that time, all sensationalists and lost dogs have visited him and discovered that he is a teacher and not an entertainer, and they have gone on their way. But since I have been here only about 12 years, I am still surrounded by many who, whatever their outward appearance, are greedy for knowledge and anxious for excitement. Had you not noticed that there are always more sheep in any given place than there are lions in their own place? The crystal. There is a legend which tells of a young man's search for knowledge through experience. He followed everyone and practiced everything that he could think of to seek what there might be for man beyond the dimensions of ordinary life. Eventually he arrived at the cave of a very ancient sage, who sat with a crystal in front of him. The young man seated himself before the sage and gazed into the shining surface. He saw all kinds of things which he had never even heard of, and things which he had never even imagined. Then he said to the master, "It is not enough to be a spectator even to these wonders. I must somehow manage to live through them." The sage invited him to step into the crystal. As soon as he tried, the young man found that he could indeed walk into any of the scenes which he had witnessed. Presently he stepped out of the crystal again. Without a word, the sage handed him a hammer, and the young man smashed the ball to fragments and walked away. Selfishness. When asked why he did not criticize people, Anwar, son of Hayat, said, "Selfishness. If someone exposes a fault of a neighbor, it can be good for a village. But if he is not a man who has overcome arrogance, he will make himself more arrogant by exercising criticism. I am too selfish to want to be contaminated by deepening my arrogance." Experience. A certain Sufi was asked, "Why did you travel so much in your youth, gaining such a variety of experiences?" He answered, "Because if I had done it once I was well known, people would have treated me differently, and so I would not have had the experiences." The Botanists. Land without medicine. Once upon a time, many years ago, there was a garden, tended by loving and talented workers. The garden was developed through effort and sacrifice from waste land, and at a time when nobody in the whole world cared about gardens. The botanists and other specialists who worked here over a vast expanse of time sent out expeditions to find and bring back every kind of plant from the most remote places imaginable. Some of the plants, like cotton, yielded fibers suitable for spinning. Others provided nutritious food. Other plants again had medicinal virtues. But then a calamity struck the garden, so that most of the gardeners were killed. The remainder of them were compelled to withdraw to distant places. In due course, other people arrived. They soon recognized the practical value of food plants, and they cultivated them. Then they discovered that some of the flowers and herbs could be used as dyes. Finally, for they were indefatigable experimenters, they penetrated the secrets of the textiles which could be made from fibrous material. And yet, strangely, these people failed to discover the special properties of the medicinal plants, and so they had no real medical science at all. When they became ill, they spoke incantations, and then they recovered or were maimed or died. This they regarded as the right and natural order of events. Some legends about medicine reached them from time to time, but they were rational people and did not believe in this cult, since it sounded like a superstition or wishful thinking, as it would to you if you had been brought up without it. They said, "Of course everyone wants to become better, so people have fantasized the science of medicine." The botanists, however, still existed. Some of them came back to the place which had formerly been their garden, planted by their own ancestors. It was then that they discovered, to their dismay, that medicine was now regarded locally as archaic nonsense. "We should soon be able to put people right on this," they said, "for we can demonstrate that illnesses can be cured in many cases by simple means through an expert knowledge of plants." They were, to be sure, not only botanists but also people of caution. Before attempting to restore the knowledge of leechcraft, they carried out a survey of the nature and behaviour, the thoughts and the institutions of the people who now lived in the garden. It was then that they received a shock. The people who had superseded them were, apart from a minority generally totally unsuited for the study of medicine, overlaid with such habits of selective reasoning that even demonstration would not convince them that there could be such a thing as medicine. True, they clamoured for demonstration, but then they would not allow the scientists, the anachronists as they called them, to demonstrate medicine in a manner which would allow a cure to take place. For instance, they insisted upon their own conditions, such as that all cures should take place within 6 minutes, or that nothing should be taken internally as a medicine in case it harmed someone. So the scientists went into seclusion again, until the people should become so desperate and so riddled with disease that they would submit to the superstitious treatments which they otherwise shunned, or until there were enough dispassionate students among those who reckoned that medicine was a possibility for real demonstrations to be held. Worse. A philosopher said, "Such a great deal of conversation among dervishes is concerned with the refining of man. I am tired of this, for as an objective man I want to hear the other side, about making man worse." A dervish who was present said, "Felicitous one. Talking about man being better or about his being worse serves both purposes. Among those who have not got the basis, there is no quicker way to make a man worse than to talk about his refinement. Why else would dervishes decline to teach all comers?" Money. There is a story about a man who went to a dictionary compiler and asked him why he was interested in money. The lexicographer was quite surprised and said, "Wherever did you get that idea?" "From your own writings," said the visitor. "But I have only written that one dictionary. That is my writings," said the author. "I know, and that is the book which I have read," said the other man. "But the book contains 100,000 words, and out of those I don't suppose that more than 20 or 30 are about money." "What are you talking about all the other words for," said the visitor, "when I was asking you about the words for money?" This podcast is copyright 2016, the Idris Shah Foundation.